Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and today I am here with Jake. Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
There are a lot of really fascinating cubes that are part of the lineup for CubeCon this year, and I was introduced through that process to a brand new one that I had not seen before, and this is the Casebook of Tamiyo Planeswalker. I'm really excited to dive into this today.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun designing this one. It's actually the first cube I've ever designed.
Hey, that's really exciting. So right off the bat, getting to share this with a platform like CubeCon.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, cool. Well, before we go too far into the cube itself, I like to ask at the beginning, Jake, why cube?
I had not really played much cube, if at all, until CubeCon, I want to say 2023. I only went for about a day just because I'm local to Madison, and I played like two drafts, and it was fantastic. Once I finally got into the actual design process, it was really great to just be able to flex the old game design muscles that I hadn't used in nigh on a decade, and being able to cultivate a draft environment means that you're not beholden to the wide power band that you get in other formats. Specific draft environments have a narrow power band. This lets you sort of cultivate it to showcase the cards that you want to showcase.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned, Jake, that you had some game design in your background before. What sorts of things were you working on then?
So I actually went to college for the name of the program was Media Arts and Game Development.
Very cool.
It was very cool. Unfortunately, it turns out there's not a lot of local game design positions, so the ability to actually utilize that was a bit less than I had anticipated. But discovering Cube sort of let me do a bit more with that.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to laugh at the experience as much as
Oh no,
just the general feeling of like, I've worked really hard to get better at this thing. And it's like, where is the person within 20 miles that wants to pay me to do this
yeah,
thing?
yeah, that's kind of the problem. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. So with the background and actually studying that, then finding this as an outlet to showcase it in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I've also done a bit of writing work with Magic, this lets me sort of approach the game and the community from sort of a different angle.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I wanted to pry into that just a little bit. What did you said you were doing some freelance work or some creative work for Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, so I am a freelance creative text writer. So every set they'll get about four or five of us to get together and work on all of the names and flavor text for a given set. So I've contributed stuff to Phyrexia, Thunder Junction, Ether Drift, Tarkir Dragonstorm, and a couple projects that haven't been announced yet.
Very cool. Is it
Yeah.
just like here's kind of a world building guide, flesh it out for us, or is it like we need flavor text for insert card name here?
Well, so we do have a world guide that we have access to explain all of the work that the world building team, the in-house third creative team, has gone into with that. And then we will go into the card file. There's usually a focus on a couple dozen cards every week that we try to bounce ideas off of each other and get inspiration from each other's work and try to create the best submissions for each of them that we can. Obviously, some cards are going to be wordy enough that they don't need flavor text. Sometimes we write it for it anyways, just in case it changes.
Right.
Reprints don't need card names. Yeah, in general, we'll submit a couple few name options and flavor text options, each of us, for each card.
That sounds really awesome. I imagine it's got to be kind of a mixed bag sometimes to see a card and you're like, well, this one should have had my suggested title or flavor text.
They usually do a pretty great job of finding the ones that should be on there. I have a one or two complaints just personally, but I'm not going to get into that here
Oh no.
because I would like to work on more sets.
No, oh no. And that's not to dog on anybody either. I know there's just the challenge of a bunch of likely good creative ideas going together, you can only name a card one thing at the end of it.
Yeah, I do not envy the job of those who have to choose which ones make the cut, because every set I've been on has just had some absolutely phenomenal writers on there and some phenomenal submissions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's so cool, and that makes a lot of sense now as I'm considering the casebook of Tamiyo Planeswalker that you've worked on. That you have this flavor schema in mind as you're working on this whole project. Would that be a fair assessment?
It certainly started that way. Yeah, my initial concept was I had seen all of these different cubes at CubeCon, and that first year I was like looking at some of the, I think, Doctor Who previews were starting to come out around that time, and I was like, oh, they're starting to bring in some more stuff with clues. I really enjoyed clues back in Shadows over Innistrad, and I'm just a big mystery buff in general, so I'd like to find a way to make a cube that is about all different ways to use clues. And that sort of just cogitated in the back of my brain for a year, and I hadn't really done much of anything with it by the next CubeCon except make a list of all of the different cards that make or use clues specifically. And it turns out there's a few problems with that. One is that they are overwhelmingly in blue. Second
Yes.
is that there's not a lot of cards that make clues, just investigate cards in general. And third is that they're not very good. Just the cards that make them, on average, have a pretty low power level, which is, not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a bit challenging to work with.
Or the cards oriented around commander that are tuned way up from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, getting into how it sort of went forward from there, I talked to a bunch of other cube designers at last year's CubeCon, so 2024. I talked to Morgan, I talked to Cade, I talked to Usman, I talked to just a bunch of folks who are like relatively known factors in the community that I just happened to strike up a conversation with.
Truly an all-star cast, and
Yeah,
certainly the kind of thing where it's nice that these are just folks that are hanging out and are excited to talk to you about the projects you're working on.
absolutely. And I explained, I had these sort of ideas, and it was actually Morgan's disaster movie cube.
Yeah.
That was what gave me the idea that, you can have a 5-color cube that doesn't use every color the same. Like their cube is, it's 3-color, but it's not just wedges or just shards. It's specific different themes, and the colors match the themes. And that's what sort of got me into, well, if I have a lot of blue, what if I just took 3-color archetypes, but I only had 6 of them, and they're all of the 3-color combinations that use blue.
Yeah.
And I just sort of started working with that, and my initial draft was, we'll say it was unpolished.
That's another shared experience, Jake.
Yeah. There were some issues. I had, at the last minute before my first playtest, I had a gut instinct and cut Ocelot Pride.
That sounds like a wise gut instinct.
It was, I was thinking, oh, you can make copies of your clue tokens that you generate, and
Yeah.
no, that
I mean, that is
but
true, but that's not what people are going to use it for.
no, I mean, I had cards like an instant that taps 2 creatures and you investigate for like 2 or 3 mana alongside Broadside Bombardiers. It was, it was a bit rough. And also, that initial draft, my idea was to solve the issue of there not being enough clue production. I was going to have a global emblem that was like basically like the Monarch, where the first
Oh, okay.
person who deals combat damage, they get this status. I called it the burden of proof. At the end of your turn, you investigate. And that worked okay, but after a couple of playtests, I was very lucky. There is a huge cube community here in Madison, so I was able
Yes.
to get some great feedback and actually be able to playtest it multiple times without having to hunt down a group of people every time. But the problem with that was that if someone is able to get in a bit of combat damage with some of the evasive creatures that I'd included, they can then just sort of go shields up and just keep generating clues every turn without really needing to engage further, because if the other person can't damage you, you're still generating a clue every turn.
It sounds apropos that you mentioned the monarchy or something like initiative, that's exactly how
Mm-hmm.
that plays in most constructed environments, where you connect, you hang on to it, and you never give it up.
Exactly. So after one or two attempts with that, I decided to change it to, rather than a monarch style status, I switched it to a global emblem where the first time each turn that you deal combat damage to an opponent, you investigate. And I phrased it specifically so that it's not like, well, if you get double strike, if you
Yeah.
hit with multiple creatures. No, it's just you only get the investigate once each turn with that. But that made it so that you do need to continue engaging actively with the game, engaging with your opponent, and continue attacking if you want to make clues that way. Now, there are some other clue engines in the deck that you can just draft, and you don't necessarily need to interact with combat. You're going to get a lot of clues in general, but you always have the option of combat to continue getting more clues as time goes on.
And the other part of that is that combat pushes the game to a conclusion naturally anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to have mid to late game value engines be an option, but I didn't want it to be just the default every game sort of devolves into just grindy nonsense. It's fun every once in a while, but not as a default state.
Yeah, I had a couple questions about how this emblem, which I think you've named Tamiyo's deduction,
Yes.
I really enjoy that. I wanted to ask kind of how this impacts the environment's play. Since you benefit from connecting and combat damage, does this make your lower value creatures a lot more valuable in a way?
It does. And that is also something that I've had to sort of iterate on over time, because one of my more recent playtests, some of the feedback that I got was that early evasion, like just a turn one flying man, can absolutely run away with the game because you're just generating. If the opponent doesn't have a way to either remove that creature or get a blocker in the way of your evasion, you can just start stockpiling clues to use later much faster than the opponent can deal with. So, to that extent, I tried to keep evasion off of the one drop slot in the current environment, as well as try to give more ways to deal with the early evasive creatures so that they are still good. Like, they're still absolutely a way to generate that early advantage, but it's not just a whoever gets the play and gets out their flying men first just automatically is in a winning position.
Yeah, yeah, that tracks. Yeah, I try to do a test draft of cubes as we talk about them here, and that was part of my experience. Was like, man, I feel like I really just want to grab almost anything at one mana to make that
Mm-hmm.
possible. But as you noted, most of them aren't literal flying men. Most of them aren't the sort of things that can just get through with no questions asked. And there's a lot of twos that can stop all that. So
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like it's in a comfy place, or at least getting to where you like it.
Yeah, for sure. It's thankfully it's gotten better with each playtest and hasn't backslid yet. But
That's the hope, yeah.
yeah, and one more thing I want to bring up design wise, just while I'm thinking of it. I started out with that plan of the three color archetypes. Currently, as we're recording this, the description of the cube still reflects that. I went into it, I was like, okay, I'm going to do Bant hand size matters. And it's going to be like all, Maros and the Kamigawa cards, the care about cards in your hand.
I was going to mention Kamigawa, yeah.
Yeah. Some of those are still in there, and that was a lot of fun, but it turned out that the archetypes were not really being felt in the actual draft so much. Like, some of them were like Grixis Sacrifice was probably the strongest thing. My idea was each of the archetypes interacts with a different part of the clues. Like, some of them want you to draw extra cards on a turn. Some of them want you to keep your hand size large. Some of them care about you having a bunch of tokens or a bunch of artifacts or a bunch of sacrifice fodder, just different ways to interact with clues. But it turned out that that was not really felt so much. Like, you could draft a teamer deck with absolutely no things that care about your second draw of the turn, for example.
Hmm.
So currently, it's still aimed at three color play based on just the gold cards and the fixing that I have. Ideally, you will be in three colors, one of which is blue, but I stopped trying to carve out each three color combination with its own identity, and it's now more of a you're going to have a bunch of different ways to use your clues, maybe multiple over the course of the game, and you'll have to sort of be adaptable and flexible and figure out how best to use that resource as the game goes on and as the draft goes on.
Yeah, I remember being particularly impressed with the variety of ways to use clues. Like, and not just by reading the overview, of course, which is like our hope as designers, maybe compared to how
Mhm.
players actually end up playing it, but the number of things that as you read a card, you go, oh, wait, there's a hook here. Did that kind of come about
Yeah.
naturally, or did you seek those out as you were building it?
Well, that was sort of how I found what I wanted to put in the cube, right? Like, once I stopped trying to just do all of the investigate cards, it became a sense of how does every card in the cube link back to either a way to use clues or something that benefits from clues or a way to make more clues based on the clues that you have. Obviously, there's a few vegetables in there to make things work, but I wanted everyone who drafts the cube to be able to have that moment of, oh, wait, I can do this and I can use
Yeah.
this way. That was sort of the goal there. So certainly in recent sets I've been able to find different threads. Tarkir got me a lot of three color stuff that I could bring in. Final Fantasy had a lot of artifact synergies that I was able to incorporate.
Right.
Stuff like that. A couple of vehicles from Ether Drift. I actually have a couple of Start Your Engines cards because you're going to want to be attacking your opponent anyways with these small evasive creatures. So having a couple of cards with speed, I think I might have taken out all of them except the Speed Demon just because people the overall view of Ether Drift was not great, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, some challenges there, but being able to use some of it that way sounds promising.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think maybe that's a good segue to ask about that. Tell me a little bit about the speed of the environment. Because I know clues cost mana to crack, card advantage matters, but how that comes about in relation to tempo, I'm curious what your thought is on that.
Yeah, for sure. So it is not a super fast format. When I think of fast formats, I think of like Amaket, where it
Right, yeah.
was, just
One
hit the
drop, two
ground
drop,
running, hit
insert.
as hard
Yeah.
as you can, and yeah. No, this is you will have time to use your clues in creative ways because even though there's a good amount of evasion, most of it is on smaller creatures. So even if you're taking damage almost every turn, you might not be taking a lot of damage, or you might be able to use your clues to gain you some life or something like that. So in general, there will be enough time to do some of your nonsense. Obviously, some decks are going to be faster than others. One of my initial plans was to have Jeskai Metalcraft, so that was going to be a very aggressive deck. And Jeskai is still one of the more aggressive combinations, I guess.
That tracks, right? You've got red white tacked onto
Yeah,
your blue core. Kind of in that vein, how important is card advantage since every color has access to it now?
clues are invariably a way to smooth out games. You're not usually going to have a ton of games where you are mana screwed or you run out of things to do in your hand. It'll happen, of course, but the fact that you will often have clues to work with and just dump your mana into when you have nothing, you're just completely out of gas. You can start cracking your clues for that's almost a fail state is
Right,
just
right.
cracking your clues to draw cards to find something, but it is something that you're going to do. It's something that I do every draft. I think every match that I play with this is, eventually you're going to need to crack your clues to draw cards, but that will draw you into ways to use those clues on other things.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does seem like it's a really nice thing to just have kind of that built-in smoothing mechanic that a lot of
Yeah,
like retail limited sets have, something like cycling or maybe clues
exactly.
themselves, like just having that built in.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in my early years playing Magic just reading every game design article Mark Rosewater put out, and that was something that really stuck with me, is that every limited environment you want to have some sort of a mana smoothing mechanic or deck smoothing mechanic or whatever you want to call it. And that could take the form of morph. It could take the form of cycling. It could take the form of investigate, which, I quite enjoyed that in Shadows over Innistrad.
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that one. Clues are certainly one of my very favorite type of trinket artifacts.
Yeah.
Did you consider other trinket artifacts at any point, or was like this was always based around clues?
It was always based around clues to the extent that I initially wanted to try and create sort of a mystery theming around the whole thing. That did become less in the sense that a lot of cards are now in there for their mechanical play rather than their flavor.
Mm,
However, I do still have nearly every Tamiyo in the cube. My very most recent revision, I was finally convinced to take out Tamiyo Inquisitive Student. She isn't as good as you might think in this cube, but she is still quite good.
yeah. It comically like doesn't interact with your emblem the same way, but you
Right.
still get the clue
the
anyway.
the emblem almost turns every creature into a one mana Tamiyo. However, the danger is more in when she's able to transform, and just her +1 is not fun to play against, and it makes generating more clues so much harder for your opponent.
Right.
But there was a time when I had the Tale of Tamiyo in here, and there was technically a Tamiyo's archetype that you could try. I don't know how good it was. No one ever actually tried to go for it.
Oops, all Tamios doesn't resonate the same way as like all Jaces or all Gideons.
Unfortunately, no. There wasn't exactly a critical mass, especially in a 540 card cube.
So was that like as you were working with clues, was it kind of like thinking broadly flavor, like, oh, well, Tamio is a character that engages with this? Or was Tamio part of the inspiration too?
When Investigate was introduced, it was so heavily tied to Tamiyo that I just
Yeah.
still sort of think of them in the same breath. Tamiyo's journal was one of the first big Investigate cards, and when the 3-color Tamiyo was coming out in Eldritch Moon, I don't know about everyone else. I was certainly expecting her to investigate in some way. It turned out not to be the case, but I wanted to have a mystery themed name to the cube so that at least that holds over from the original planned theming. And I just instantly thought of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, which is
Yeah.
one of the collections of Arthur Conan Doyle's short stories. And I was like, well, whose casebook would this be? If any Planeswalker is going to go into detective work, it would be Tamiyo or Narset, but probably Tamiyo.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
However, in quick conversation, it's not usually the casebook of Tamiyo Planeswalker. It will be either Tamiyo's casebook or sometimes even just casebook.
That's fair, but like the title is evocative in a way that I think
Yeah,
is helpful. It's not just like this is the clue cube or the
right.
clube, I guess.
That was the initial name, and I thought it was very clever until I saw about 15 other cubes that had that name, and I was like, well, time to think of something else.
I've forgotten the name of the author, but the book Moonwalking with Einstein, about memory and about how things stick in our brain. There is
Mhm.
something about finding an evocative title that is really compelling.
Yeah.
Joshua Foer is the author of that one. So speaking of the flavor, thinking of flavor all the way through, like your overview particularly is just dripping with the ideas that are so flavorful. I know you mentioned this has kind of evolved from the mechanics around clues, but you try to define your sub themes with these titles like noir and thriller and kind of categories of mystery. Was that something again that just kind of evolved over time?
That did come from my first draft when I was really trying to go hard on, this is the strategy that Esper is trying to do. I specifically want Esper to be about artifacts. So I wanted to have names for the different archetypes, but I wanted it to connect back creatively to the whole mystery theming because even then the cards were sort of starting to move away from that. So I wanted to still have that be at least present in the drafter's brain. Some of the connections are a bit stronger than others, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be keeping those terms specifically now that it has moved away from strict archetypes, but I absolutely intend to keep the detective novel theming in the description because that's just fun to write.
Yeah, and it's fun to read too. I really liked it.
Yeah, but no, as far as the specific names went, I just thought that the sort of different genres of detective fiction was a good source for names of the archetypes because you have your, whodunits, and that is evocative of one thing, noir, pulp, cozy mystery, but sort of a more police procedural kind of thing. These all have very distinctive feels when you're looking at mystery fiction. So I figured in that same sense, you're looking at different feels within each deck would have a different feel within the context of the cube being sort of your umbrella category and having your different subcategories.
So do you present those to players before a draft? Do you say like, "Hey, these are the buckets you can find yourself in," or does it get more open than that?
Yes, until again, I only recently sort of was given the feedback that the archetypes aren't really coming through, so I'm probably going to cut that from my initial pitch for the cube and just be more like there are a lot of different ways to interact with the clues. You'll have to track them all down yourself.
I see what you did there. That's good.
I came up with it on the spot because I my detective fiction categories are mixed.
I did want to ask, and I know we've kind of moved a little bit past Tamiyo specifically, but how do you feel about Tamiyo being a character that Wizards of the Coast is unlikely to return to in their fiction?
It's an interesting question because I mentioned before my work on the creative text. So the first set I worked on was Phyrexia, and I got the initial world guide and everything before anyone had ever seen Kamigawa. So I was like,
Amazing. Yeah.
I'm looking at, oh, we get all of these Phyrexian planeswalkers. That's so incredible. And I'm reading the world guide, and it's like, oh, Jingatech just made the first one, and it was Tamiyo. Okay,
Oh no.
that's new. um,
Oh
and
no, that's got to be heartbreaking.
well, she was one of my favorite Planeswalker characters. I have like a running list of top 5, and she's been on there since I started that list. And I had to wait a very long time to figure out what actually happened to her and some of the other completed Planeswalkers. But no, I found out that she died along with everyone else, and it was rough. That is an absolutely heartbreaking moment in the story.
Yeah.
And I liked that there was that sort of glimmer of hope with the story sort of left to sort of stay with Nashi and all that. And then, of course, Duskborn happened.
Right.
However, I think that even though the character is gone, her presence is still felt to a certain extent. We have Nashi sort of carrying on her legacy there. She was a beloved character for a long time, and
Yeah.
I don't expect them to bring her back. I had been wanting them to bring Venzer back for, well
Right.
over a decade. That didn't happen. It's not going to happen. But
Yeah.
it's, in Magic, if you die, unless you're very clearly given a means back, you're probably going to stay dead. But as we've seen in Modern Horizons 3, which came out after she died, but still had a bunch of cards around her,
Yeah.
our storyline doesn't have to be linear. So I feel like we could potentially see other Tamiyo related cards in the future, whether they're related to Nashi or if they're related to just stuff in the past or what have you. So she's a beloved character and she's an important character.
I appreciate a lot what you said there about the story beats. I mean, she was a critical character in
Mm-hmm.
Eldritch Moon and how the
Mm-hmm.
events of that story played out. Like you said, going through Neon Dynasty, of course, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Phyrexia Albi one. So, like, that's all part of it. And it's nice that you have a mechanic like Investigate that is not intrinsically tied to one character, even though it is flavorfully in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, as someone whose magic related internet handles are based around a planeswalker who is also dead, I have similar feelings.
Yeah. Hey, I only started latching onto Ronus and Maelstrom Pulse after he'd already died, so that
Yeah.
was
Oh man. Oh man. Amonkhet story. Good times.
yeah, that's a real one.
Well, I want to make sure also that we touch on the blue focus of this cube. You noted clues live in this space
Hmm.
generally. Many of the cards that play with that mechanic are right around there. I've appreciated how you've taken blue as this core color that bleeds into all the others, or that you would expect players to connect with in the draft in some way. Do you envision most players being in blue decks, or do you think there's space for folks to draft a non blue deck at some point?
There is definitely space. I have had at least one or two players in drafts that we've run have had non-blue decks, and I think someone 3-0'd with a two-color non-blue deck, and it was very interesting. You are not beholden to use blue. It's generally probably going to be a good idea to at least touch blue, but by no means do you have to. As far as monocolors go, there's a little more than twice as many blue cards as any other monocolor. However, where I really tried to sort of encourage that was in the gold cards. So each non blue color pair has like four cards, which are ideally, if you're, in blue and two other colors, you're hopefully going to be the only person in the pod who really wants those cards if they come up. However, each pair that is blue and another color, so Azorius, Demir, Izzet, and Simic, those have a lot more cards. Those have like generally 16, 17 cards each. So if you know that you're likely to be in blue, then gold cards don't necessarily have to be committing to two colors initially. If there's a really good blue black card in your opening pack, you can pretty comfortably pick one, pack one it, and know that you still have that flexibility. I tried to make the mana fixing really good. Again, especially in terms of blue and another color.
Yeah.
So you should be able to splash a fourth or even fifth color if you really want to.
Yeah, I was noting, I think you have at time of recording north of 100 lands in the cube. So
Yeah.
your fixing is rich in a 540 card environment. Or sorry, 541 card environment.
Well, fun story with that. It is a 540 card cube. There is a partner pair that is built around clues. It is Madame Vastra and Jenny Flint from the Doctor Who decks.
Mhm. Mhm.
They are built to work with clues. And since they are a team or pair taken together, I was like, okay, I want you to be able to draft this, but the odds of actually getting both of them in a draft is incredibly low. So my solution to that was I have a single card that represents both of them that you can draft. And if you draft that card, you get both Madame Vastra and Jenny Flint in your draft pool.
Excellent. That's a good fix for that, I think. And especially in a 540, you may not see both of them in a draft at
Mm-hmm.
all, much less at your
Yeah.
seat.
Again, I wanted to make the 3 color rewards pretty splashy. I think each 3 color combination of blue XY combination has like a really solid removal spell and some very flashy mid to top end cards to deal with. Like Grixis, you have Ashnod the Uncaring, which is just a fun sort of sacrifice payoff. Jeskai gets Narset from Mom Aftermath,
Yes.
which is again, it's sort of a fun build around that if you're in Jeskai, you can be like, this seems like a really cool thing that I wouldn't normally be able to draft with. Let's see what I can do with this.
And as you noted, most players aren't going to be interested in each one of those. So if you're
For
in that
sure.
zone, you're going to be able to pick that up pretty
Mm-hmm.
safely.
Yeah. And if for the truly ambitious, there is a Brea in the cube.
Excellent. Man, well, with artifacts, I mean, you're
Yeah,
going to have some
exactly.
artifacts going around.
Uh-huh.
So whose journal is better in this cube, Tamiyo's or Venser's?
I mean, I would say probably Tamios just because it gets you an additional cube each turn. But I mean, Venser's Journal, it can get you a lot of life.
Uh-huh.
So it's a very good way of enabling your sort of more late game plan. So ideally, you get them both.
There you go. That's the answer I was looking
Just
for.
start building your library.
No, I've been a long time enjoyer of Ivory Tower in old school, so Venser's Journal is
Yes.
does things to my brain here. Well, Jake, as we think about the logbook of experiences here for you putting this cube together and what you've learned along the way, what advice would you want to share with other designers as they're considering their own projects?
Well, first off, Tamio's logbook is in the cube, but that's not, I don't think, what you. Um, no, I guess again, this is my first cube, so I'm still relatively new to the whole. A year ago, I did not know anything about cube design, so I would advise 2 things. One, don't be beholden to typical draft sort of standards. If you want to have 10 2-color archetypes, go for it. If you don't, try whatever weird idea you have in your mind and just start going for it and see if it works. And the second point, sort of building off of that, don't try to make it perfect the first time through because it's not going to be. No matter how much you try, in the world of D&D, we say no plan survives contact with the party. It's you can design this perfect dungeon, this perfect cube environment, and someone is going to think of something that you didn't. Maybe they're going to realize that Ocelot Pride does not belong in any reasonably powered cube.
What are your
Maybe
playtesters for?
yeah, exactly. That's what playtests are for. So just don't be afraid to get those playtests in and be ready to listen to whatever advice they have for you. And even if there's a card you really love in the deck, like Tamiyo Inquisitive Student, if enough people tell you that it does not belong there, sometimes you gotta let things go.
There's a way to feedback, right? There's a time where you
Yeah.
can say, "Hey, this is something I really value." There are other
Yeah,
times where it's like,
I
"I'm going to be burned at stake if I
I
don't."
kept it through the first several times people told me it does not belong there. But once I started getting up to probably about a dozen people, I was like, okay, maybe they're onto something here.
Well, Jake, as we trend toward wrapping up here, I get to ask you one of my favorite questions, which is, if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick, and who would you have do the illustration?
Whew. That is interesting. So Getting back into some of the deep lore here, my profile picture on Blue Sky is a little cartoon Ronus. And that's because after Hour of Devastation, I wanted to make a YouTube show and I'm going to voice this little cartoon Ronus and I'm going to tell magic stories. And it turns out that is very hard to commit to when you're also doing a full time job. So
Yes. Jobs take time. Who would have thought?
I was not able to make more than a couple episodes of that, but Ronus has still stayed sort of an important character to me. My whole thing was Maelstrom Pulse for that. So I think I would like to either have another Maelstrom Pulse with Ronus on it. There's one right now with like Ronus and Bantu, but just sort of something sort of showcasing Ronus there, or a promo of Ronus himself. And something suitably dramatic like his last showdown with the Scorpion God would be very cool. So Ronus the Indomitable specifically, not God Eternal Ronus.
Sure. Oh
Although
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a fun card too.
I mean, I played a lot more during Amonkhet, so Ronus the Indomitable lives permanently in my
Mm-hmm.
brain.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
4 power gap of beating face is wild.
Yeah. As for the art, I have a lot of favorite artists. This doesn't feel like Magali work for me. I'm gonna say Steve Argyle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Love that.
I was a regular on Steve Argyle's streams back in the day, and he has a very distinctive style, specifically with that sort of metal texture that you would have on Ronus's head and armor that I think would be really interesting to see.
Steve did some of the work in Amonkhet originally too, so I know he has the chops for that there.
One or two pieces, yeah.
But now that'd be really cool. I like that a lot. Well, Jake, this has been a delight, and I'm so glad that you were willing to take the time to share with us about your cube and some of your background. If folks want to connect with you, or perhaps learn more about the Casebook of Tamiyo Planeswalker, or connect with any of your other projects, where would be the best place for us to point them?
Sure. So I'm probably most accessible on Blue Sky. I have gotten rid of just about all my other social media. So I'm on Blue Sky as Maelstrom Pulse.
Excellent.
And, it wasn't available on Twitter, but when I switched to Blue Sky, it was available there. And the Casebook of Tamiyo Planeswalker, you can see the entire list on Q Cobra. Hopefully, by the time this is posted, I will have updated the deck description. No promises, but I will do my best. And yeah, I have a couple other cube ideas that I'm sort of tossing around, so hopefully we'll be able to talk again at some point.
I find that cube is kind of like Pringles, once you pop, fun don't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't make just one.
You kind of can't. No, I'm gonna need some more sleeves.
Outstanding. Well, Jake, thank you so much. This has been a joy, and I do hope we get to connect again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. This year, I got to show off my two proudest accomplishments in all of Magic, which is that I got to name an Amonkhet god, and I got to bring back my favorite flavor text character from being an
No, wait, no, wait. Did you get to name Ketramos?
I named Ketramos, yeah.
What?
Um that it
That's
was
amazing.
in design, his playtest name was like Ururat, and I dug into Middle Egyptian etymology and I was like, okay, so the character that would later become Zahur, his name at the time was Ramose, because that is a name that has been attributed to cats in ancient Egypt. But it's like I looked into it and it's like, okay, Ramos literally just means born of Ra. So if I go Ketramos, then it would be born of Oketra.
Oh, that's so sick.
So
That's
um
so
and
cool.
and actually I submitted that name for, again, the character that would become Zahur, and it was Jay and Ellie who was like, this would be a good name for the Black White God.
Jake, that's
So
so cool.
yeah,
That's
and
so
I
cool.
what's more, they ended up using my flavor text, which I didn't think they were going to for a long time. So I love my cat godson. He's great.
Boy, that's a sentence that very few people can say.
Yeah.